Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can we believe it's the middle of September already? No, it's going to be Christmas tomorrow. Tomorrow. So excited. I'm Stacy, one of the clergy here, for those of you who I think I know everyone, but just in case. Dr. Randall Sackman. So excited to welcome you back for. We figured this out the other day. We thought Randall had already completed his 5th year, but you're entering your 5th year.
I'm entering my 5th year.
You're entering your 5th year, and just so, in case you want to know this, it's wood or silverware is an appropriate gift
for the end of the 5th year.
For the end of the 5th year, and Randall has expressed a preference towards silverware. Just like that. I see a hand up. Hello.
We love to chant 4 more years.
Oh, there we go. I like that.
We absolutely can do that. We absolutely can do that. So grateful for you and all that you do. I learn so much from you every single time I'm with you, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Because this year is going to be focused on creation, God is creator, and our role in God's creation, we're going to say, we're going to hear this prayer for knowledge of God's creation. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Almighty and everlasting God, you made the universe with all its marvelous order, its atoms, worlds, and galaxies, and the infinite complexity of living creatures. Grant that, as we probe the mysteries of your creation, we may come to know you more truly and more surely fulfill our role in your eternal purpose. In the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. That's a beautiful.
Friends, have a great first Sunday back. I'll look forward to popping in and popping out. And thank you for being here. And I'll turn it over to Randall. Here you go.
Thank you.
All right.
Stacey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. And thank you for the chant. That's a nice thing. God willing, right? As the Muslims would properly say. Well, welcome back. It's great to see everyone again. I was counting with my wife. It's been 3 months since I've been up here. So, in fact, I haven't even been at St. James for 3 months. So we've been traveling about. Had a great summer. I hope you all had a great summer as well. So Stacy and I were brainstorming about the theme for the fall, and you probably noticed at the end of last term I was very vague about what was going to happen because we hadn't made up our mind yet. And the Episcopal Church is doing creation care in September. And there will be a tree planting event coming up. You've probably seen in headlines and happenings. And so we thought, why don't we do a series on creation for September? And then I said, well, why stop in September? It's not a theme we've done yet. Why don't we just run the table to Christmas? So that's what we're going to do. So we'll be doing creation through, and then creation in Incarnation, which was her idea. I thought it was brilliant. So the Incarnation from the point of view of creation, not from the point of view of redemption. We'll be looking at that the 2 Sundays in December. But today we'll be looking at how Israel came to know that God was the creator. This would be surprising because in the Bible, of course, just read Genesis 1. Hello? but Genesis 1, in my mind, and the mind of others, is late. It's a much later insight, revelation, however you want to put it. And so what I thought I would do this morning is just say, how did Israel come to understand their God as the creator of the universe? Because it's a really interesting way of looking at the issue. And then next time we'll do the immensity of the universe. I recommend for your viewing, I'm going to try to pull off something next week visually. There's a video that a fellow made back in 1977 called The Powers of 10. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It starts with a couple on a blanket on the shore of Lake Michigan and then winds up all the way back into the edges of the universe. And it's just by adding a 0 to the distance between things. And it's an amazing, it's an amazing experience to see. So we'll be looking at the immensity of the universe next week. Then we'll be looking at God's love for everything that God has made, including the deceased cricket we just had here. The following week, and creation itself is an act of love, which is a very interesting idea. Then the week after that, we'll do humanity created in the image of God. And the week after that, we'll do dominion. So I thought I'd split off, because the image of God and have dominion over all creatures and subdue them is in the same verses in Genesis 1. But I thought it's such a provocative topic, we'd split it off. So we'll do what is the image of God, what ramifications are there for that, and then we'll do dominion. And then there will be a couple weeks off, there'll be a disability retreat, and then Bishop Audrey's coming. But then the Sunday after that, we'll do vulnerability. Being a creature is to be vulnerable. And what are the consequences of that? Our dependency on one another, for instance, is very clear. And then the week after that, we'll do suffering. And then hopefully the clergy will have a dialogue at the end of that month on suffering. We'll see if they can pull that together. And then we'll look at the incarnation, especially from the point of view of suffering and also death. So it's not meant to be a downer, but being a creature means to suffer and die. I mean, it really does. It means to be vulnerable all the time. So finitude is endemic to being a creature. So that just gives you an overview. I thought it was a really nice arc, actually, that we put together. So I hope you like it. So this morning, what I wanted to do was look at this transition that we see from pre-Babylonian exile Israel to post-Babylonian exile Israel. And what's fascinating is, and I have a dear, dear friend, an Orthodox Jew scholar who lives in Jerusalem, and I pitched this idea to him on Wednesday when we were studying together, and he hated it. So he said, of course Israel had a creation story from the very beginning. So this is, he's like, don't you give me that, theories evolved and all this kind of thing. So it was really funny. So now I'm back on one heel a little bit given that, but I still think this is true, that Israel's identification of God, or God's identification of God to Israel, is primarily in the calling of Abraham, and especially in the Exodus. That the Exodus reveals who the God of Abraham actually is and who Israel is in relation to that. And that's the way Israel understands God from that point onward. And only later do they come to see God as the creator of all things. So that's the arc we'll be looking at this morning. And so I thought we'd begin with passages that reveal over against my friend Noam. So I told him, I said, I can run the table with these passages. I thought we'd look at some passages that talk about this, that Yahweh is not the only God, right? Yahweh is Israel's God, but Yahweh is not the only God. So one of the most provocative ones comes from the book of Exodus, when God is announcing the death of the firstborn as being the ultimate plague on the house of Egypt. God says this very intriguing statement, I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from human to animal, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. Isn't that interesting? That's such an interesting line. So bringing judgment on Egypt is also bringing judgment on the gods of Egypt. And of course, Pharaoh is seen as a divine figure, so he's probably the primary object of this judgment, but not the only one. Notice it's plural, on the gods of Egypt. So Yahweh is not the gods of Egypt, right? And he's going to bring judgment on those gods. And then we see also then that delivering Israel from Egypt, and eventually also revealing the law to them, because that's what God is revealing the law in this chapter. That is the identification of Yahweh, who Yahweh is, over against, say, the gods of Egypt. So when God is speaking to the Israelites from Mount Sinai, this is what God says very famously. Then God spoke all these words, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Notice it doesn't say, there aren't any other gods. It says, you shall have no other gods before me. This is the first unique idea Israel came up with, or God revealed to Israel. No other culture in the world had a God who demanded sole allegiance and jealously guarded that allegiance over against other gods. So notice this doesn't say, there are no other gods, right? That's what we think Israel thought, monotheism. That's not what's going on here. It's I can't remember the name of the term. Anyway, it's the sole worship of God, not the sole existence of God. is what this means. And that it was very hard for Israel to do this. You shall have no other gods before me, because all the peoples around them worshipped their gods and the gods of the people they were in good relationship with. So if you made a treaty, for instance, with another country around you and other people around you, you would incorporate the worship of their gods in your temple, and they would incorporate the worship of your God in their temple. And Israel was forbidden to do that. So the people with whom they were making treaties were like, what are we, spoiled milk? You know, is this a real treaty? Or are you just pulling our leg? And so the pressure to worship other gods was immense. I mean, it's just what everyone did. And so, of course, if you know the story of the history of Israel, God's constantly punishing the Israelites because they keep worshiping other gods. Well, that's because everybody worshiped other gods. It's just what you did. And there was no sense that the God of the Ammonites was different or was uniquely to be worshipped over against the God of the Egyptians and things like that. So it's a very provocative statement. I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So if that's all God ever did or revealed, that would be plenty, because it is unique, and no other nation stands under that injunction, and then was punished repeatedly for violating that injunction. And we have inherited that, by the way. So our view is not a happily pluralistic view. We can worship whatever we want. At least that's the traditional Christian view. And so it has created, as you know, enormous difficulties for people through history, especially when you get different cultures, even today in Africa and elsewhere, that don't have that view of just sole worship of God. But it doesn't deny the existence of other gods. I used to tell my students, it would be a no-brainer to fulfill your marriage vow if no other women or men existed, right? It's like, and I pledge my life to be, completely committed to you because there's nobody else, right? It's like, so if monotheism really kind of eradicates the difficulty of this problem, and we'll look at that. We'll look at what Isaiah says and Jeremiah says, and it does go in a very different direction. So it's like, so you can see the pressure of it is, yes, there are other gods, and you won't have anything to do with them before me. It doesn't, and before me could be put me at the top and then them below me. It's kind of interesting. It doesn't mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you shall have nothing to do with them, but that does seem to be what the gist of it was. Okay, so, and then we get this view later on in the book of Judges. You get a very similar view. And then we can start to see the pattern. In Judges 11, as you know, the Israelites, when they settle the land, are oppressed by people. They fall into sin, they start worshiping other gods, right? And then God hands them over to their enemies who oppress them. And then Israel calls out on God, and God delivers them, because God can't stand to see Israel suffer. Even when they repent, God doesn't buy the repentance and says, no, I don't buy it, you just keep doing this. But they keep crying out, and God delivers them because God can't stand seeing Israel suffer, which is really significant, I think. And so Jephthah is one of the people, we call them judges, but a better word would probably be chieftain. He's one of the chieftains that God charismatically calls out to deliver the people from the Ammonites at this point. They're the enemy oppressing them. And so Jephthah has this response. He thinks that this war is being fought needlessly. The Ammonites are accusing Israel of stealing their territory and of encroaching on their land. And so Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, to the king, thus says Jephthah, and you can imagine the king of the Ammonites going, who's Jephthah? Right? He's the son of a prostitute who is called out to lead the people. It's really interesting. That period, by the way, is really cool because anyone, Deborah is called to be a chieftain, anyone could be called to be a chieftain. It's not an inherited role like kingship would be. So anyway, Jephthah, I just love, thus says Jephthah. You can imagine what the kings thought. Israel did not take away the land of Moab, that's to the east, or the land of the Ammonites, that's more northeast. Should you not, this is I find really interesting, should you not possess what your god, Chemosh, that's what it says in the text, the god of the Ammonites was Milcom, but it doesn't matter, you get the point. Should you not possess what your god, Chemosh, gives you to possess? And should not we be the ones, and should we not be the ones to possess everything that Yahweh our God has conquered for our benefit? So notice this then gives you the triple vision. Each people has their own God who has given them their own land, right? And so the Ammonites have received their land from Milcom, wrongly described as Chemosh here. The Egyptians have received their land and worship their gods. The Philistines have their God who has given them their land, etc. And so each people has their own land with their own God. And the God of Israel is intrinsically related to the land of Israel. At one point, Naaman, the Syrian, wants to, because God heals him at the hands of Elijah, he wants to worship the God of Israel when he goes back home. And to do that, he takes bags of Israelite soil with him so that he can worship Yahweh in a strange land. So there's this intrinsic relationship between Yahweh, the land, and the people. And this is true of the whole neighborhood, right? So there's this acknowledgement that Yahweh is the God of Israel, in the land of Israel, of the people of Israel, but not the God of the Ammonites. God didn't give the land to the Ammonites. Their God gave their land to the Ammonites. And Yahweh hasn't taken anything from them, right? So it's a very interesting vision, very different than the way we usually think about things. One of the more interesting ones is in the book of Ruth, which is a beautiful book. If you've never read Ruth, it's really, many people find it to be one of their favorite books. And as you may know, Naomi is in exile in Moab. She's not in exile because of a war, but there was a famine in Israel. And so she took her sons and their wives, who were both Moabite, and they moved to Moab to survive the famine. This is very common during this period. You leave your land to go to a place where you could find food. And then after the famine was over, Naomi's going to go home. And she, in the meantime, her two sons have died. And so she can't, and she has no more sons. So her daughters-in-law are now husbandless, and she can't do anything about it. She doesn't have anyone who could marry them. And so they have absolutely no reason to go home with her, to go back to Israel with her. And so one of them doesn't go back with her, and Ruth does. And that's why Ruth is such a picture of loyalty and faithfulness and things like that. But in the scene when Naomi's going to go home, this is what is said. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house," to your mother's house, right? "May Yahweh deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me," and the dead would be her sons. "Yahweh grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband." In other words, she's sending them back to the homes that their husbands came from. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me?" Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, right? So she, in fact, does take this advice. But Ruth clung to her. This word clinging, this is what you're supposed to do with your wife in Genesis 1. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife. This is what Israel is supposed to do with God. Israel is supposed to cleave to God. So Ruth cleaves to her in love, right? Ruth clung to her. So Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." Right? So you see very clearly the same thing we saw with Jephthah, that the Moabites have their own people and their own gods, and that's where they belong. That Naomi is telling them, you don't belong with me. And she also tells them in passages I didn't include that I don't have any sons anyway, what am I going to do for you in Israel? I mean, you're just going to be bereft with me. And Ruth goes back with her anyway, which is amazing. And then she, of course, winds up finding a husband, and then Naomi winds up prospering because of that. So it's a beautiful story of fidelity, but it's that line, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods, right? And there's no judgment there. She's not sending her back to commit idolatry, right? She's sending her back because those are her gods. There's nothing wrong with worshiping your gods. They're just not the God of Israel, right? Most remarkably, I think, the prophet Isaiah and the prophet Micah have exactly the same prophecy, except for the final verse. And it's a very famous one. The word of the Lord shall go out from Jerusalem, from Mount Zion. In the days to come, Zion shall be the tallest of all the mountains. Do you know that one? And then the word of God goes forth from that. It's actually the center of the Gospel of Luke, especially the book of Acts. The book of Acts is showing that the law goes forth from Jerusalem, the word goes forth from Jerusalem, fulfilling Isaiah 2 and Micah 4. Isaiah 2 is the most well-known of those passages, but Micah 4 has this remarkable conclusion at the end of it. So at the end of this, the law shall go forth out to all nations. Micah says to the people, for all the peoples walk, each in the name of its God. But we will walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever. There's nothing wrong with what the other people are doing. They have their own gods. They walk in the name of their gods. Fine, that's peace. Actually, Micah's vision of peace is everyone walk in the name of their God. We will walk in the name of Yahweh. Notice he doesn't say, you ought to stop walking in the way of your gods and walk in the way of Yahweh, right? So it's a very interesting passage, and pluralists love this passage, right? So it's very interesting. The Orthodox rabbis very recently made a statement trying to meet Christians who are trying to reach out. We talked about this last time we were together. Christians have tried to overcome anti-Judaism and made all sorts of overtures to the Jewish community, and then they sat around waiting for the Jews to say, yay, this is great, and the Jews were very not so sure what to do about this, especially the Orthodox. Because Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is one of the major Orthodox theologians in America, didn't want anything to do with this. He didn't want anything to do with Christian-Jewish rapprochement at a religious level. But the Orthodox rabbis finally make a statement that does in fact acknowledge the gift that Christianity has brought to the world, etc. And at the end of it, they quote this verse, right? At the end of it, they quote, for all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever. And that means Christians are not walking in the way of Yahweh our God, right? So the Christians walk in the way of their Trinitarian God. We walk in the way of Yahweh, and that's fine. We'll just live and let live. So it's been a very influential passage down the line. Not very well known in Christian circles, actually, but it kind of encapsulates the point that I'm trying to make, which is other gods exist. They're the gods as long as they're the gods of other people, they should worship them. But Israel should have nothing to do with them. Israel should walk in the name of Yahweh our God forever and ever, right? So that's the gist of this position. It runs through the Bible, so it doesn't go away. It's not like there's this great transformation and then this is suddenly removed. But there is, in fact, a very interesting transition that we'll look at now, and that is to there's only one God, the creator of the universe, right? And that's Israel's God. So Israel's God is the only God there is, and God's created everything. And then, of course, the punchline is, and all the other gods are created by human beings, right? And so we'll see the way that gets played on down the line. But this prophecy emerges in 2nd Isaiah, pardon me, and the prophet Jeremiah. And both of them are prophesying around the time of the Babylonian exile. There's a school of thought that they get this idea from the Babylonians themselves. Pardon me. I'm not arguing that at all. I would argue that God reveals this to Israel in Babylon because they're stuck in Babylon for 70 years. And God is in Israel where they're not anymore. And how is God going to get them out of there? Well, if God is the creator of the universe, there's nothing God can't do, right? And so I think that's actually the gist of this revelation. But we'll look at this in terms of what the prophets say. And we'll start with Isaiah 40. So just to remember, this is called 2nd Isaiah usually, and then there's a 3rd Isaiah. And I do buy it. There are different prophets or prophetesses. We don't know if 2nd Isaiah is a woman or not. Could very well be. But Isaiah 40 is the beginning of what's called 2nd Isaiah. And it's prophesying to the Israelites in exile in Babylon telling them that their exile is over and that they can go home now, right? Because Cyrus, king of Persia, has conquered the Babylonians and wants them to go back and build a temple in Jerusalem. So that's the context of this. And you can imagine the Israelites are going to be like, well, how is that going to happen? We're in Babylon. Babylon's a long way from the land we came from. How is God going to pull this off? And so Isaiah says, who has measured the waters of the sea in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? So you can see now that God is directly involved in creation, right? Including the dry land. So God creates dry land and measures its span, etc. But also the heavens. The heavens are completely the work of God, and God is related to them. Who has directed the Spirit of Yahweh, or as his counselor has instructed him? And then here's the punchline. All the nations are as nothing before God. All these Babylonian empires and the Assyrian Empire and the Persian Empire and later on the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, about which we obsess endlessly, are nothing before God. Nothing. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. Right? So you're now getting a view of humanity from the power of 10. Right? I don't know how they did this. They were suddenly seeing human beings from outer space, right? And we're nothing. You can't even see us. When the space station goes around the planet several times a day, they don't see people walking around, right? And that's not even that high. That orbit's not even that high up. So anyway, they are counted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. So the people who have captured Israel and have taken them into exile, God views them as nothing. Less than nothing. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with him? Okay, so now the gods of the other people become idols that are built to be like the gods they're representing. And can you represent this God who's created the universe, right? And who spreads the heavens like a canvas, and intrinsically relates to every star, etc. To whom then will you liken God, or with what likeness compare him? An idol? See, not the gods of the nations, an idol. A workman casts it. The gods of the other people are created by people. They don't create anything, right? And a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. Okay, by the way, the iconoclasts in the Reformation period in particular loved these passages, because they would say, look at the Roman Catholics. They make these statues of Mary, and they put flowers around her, and they parade her around the church, and they bow down before her, or the cross, or whatever. And so these are idols cast by workmen. That's what they would say. Have you not known? Have you not heard? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. I just love that line. So it's like looking down at the earth from the moon. There's a Grateful Dead song that I love. Molly Tuttle sings it on one of her albums called Standing on the Moon. And it's this wonderful way of thinking about, what would we actually stood on the moon. And what would the earth look like when you stood on the moon? But that's the sense you get from this passage. I don't know how this vision was given to them, but is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. So you can't make any likeness of me, because you're like grasshoppers, right? Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and spreads them like a tent to live in. And this is a majestic view, that the heavens that you see above us are all created by God and spread out by God for our benefit, really, or just to do that. Who brings princes to naught. So you notice immediately the implication of this. If God spreads out the heavens like a tent, princes are nothing. The chief grasshopper, right? That would be princes. And makes rulers of the earth as nothing, right? Do we believe that? I don't think so. I think we think rulers of the earth are pretty important. Isaiah doesn't. Isaiah thinks they're less than nothing. To whom then will you compare me? And notice he's actually taking on two things simultaneously. The view of rulers in this era, which is why having a king in Israel is so controversial, is that the ruler is a child of God. It says in Psalm 2, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." That is what all the rulers around Israel thought, that when somebody is called to be king, they are now a child of God, right? And so the rulers are intrinsically related to the gods of their people. And so Israel getting a king was very controversial because it seems almost idolatrous, right? And so you see this alternation between God creator and then the rulers being nothing. I just find that really fascinating. "To whom then will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and see." So he's thinking of being out at night. "Who created these?" Right? So if you've ever been, I was very fortunate, my wife and I traveled to the Southwest this summer. And there are particular places you can go, and Bryce Canyon's one of them. If you've never been to Bryce Canyon, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. And one of the great things about it is at night, there's no ambient light. So you can walk out and touch the Milky Way. It's just spectacular. So Israel's living at a time when there's no ambient light. So when he says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see," he means that the people can actually do that. They can actually see the stars. They don't have city lights blinding their view of the sky. "Who created these?" Right? So the heavens are created by God. Look up, and you can see it. Just look up and see. Who created that? Right? We'll see this is a major argument for monotheism all along, is that monotheism is based on God the creator. And if there's not a God who created everything, where did it come from? Or who created it? So this is the beginning of this argument. "He who brings out their host and numbers them, calling them all by name." So God names every single star, every single planet, right, and knows them. "Because he is great in strength, mighty in power, not one is missing." So God keeps track of the stars of the heavens, right? So the wisdom of God keeps track of the universe. And we think we're that smart, right? We'll look at this next time, actually. The humbling effect that this has when you realize that you're nothing or less than nothing, or God views you like a grasshopper, it has tremendous consequences for how important we actually think we are and how transcendent God actually is. "Have you not known? Have you not heard? Yahweh is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth." Now we say that line every Sunday, right? "I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." The first time that term occurs in the Bible is this verse, creator. I just think that's really interesting. The maker, Melchizedek, when he blesses Abraham, blesses him in the name of God Most High, the maker of heaven and earth. But that term never shows up again, and it might actually be what Melchizedek thought about God, he's not an Israelite himself. But the idea that God is the creator of the ends of the earth, that phrase, this is the first time it occurs. So have you not known, have you not heard? And they probably haven't. Yahweh is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. And so what we'll do basically for the rest of this term is run that out. What are the implications of that change? And it's not, there are many people who think it didn't always have the most salutary effect, right? To go from each people has their own God, we have our God, we're to be loyal to our God and not to anyone else's gods, but live and let live. Now it's like there's only one God who created everything, so worshiping other gods is a real problem for you. Even if you're not an Israelite, it's a problem for you, because you're worshiping something that doesn't exist, right? Isaiah 45. "For thus says Yahweh, who created the heavens, he is God." Now you can see immediately the linking of God with creating the heavens, not the linking of God with the Exodus from Egypt. Oh, it's not, along with linking God to the Exodus from Egypt, you now get God, the creator of the heavens, "who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it a chaos. He formed it to be inhabited. I am Yahweh, and there is no other." Right? There is no, each nation walks in the name of its own gods. We will walk in the name of Yahweh. It's, I am Yahweh, there is no one else, right? And so what are these other gods? What are these other gods are created by human beings, and therefore human beings are responsible for everything they do. There's a wonderful passage in Isaiah I didn't include, where he talks about how people made images, made idols. And he says, the woodsman brings in this big log, right? Half of it he sets aside for firewood so he can cook with it. The other half he forms into an image that he worships. And that's to show the absurdity of the whole thing, right? So you take this half and set it over there and put it in your kitchen stove, and the other half you start worshiping as a deity. So they do the send up of the absurdity and the futility of worshiping other gods, because other gods don't exist. They're created by people making images of them and then worshiping them. And so you can see how in periods like the iconoclast controversy, that the behavior of people bowing before the cross, kneeling before the cross, etc., kissing the cross, all that is like, you're acting just like these idolaters who make images and worship them. I'm not saying they're right, but you can see where they get these ideas from. Yeah, Gay.
Just a couple of things quickly, and that is that this reminds me of is it Psalm 115? Hands of they, but they feel not; eyes of they, but they see not.
Yeah.
You know, all this is the work of your hands.
Right.
So what's the point? These are silly things.
Right.
They can't do anything.
Right, exactly.
Then the other thing, and it's probably going to be answered later on, but where does Job fit into this?
Oh, Job will, yeah.
Where are you when I stretched out? Where
All
are
right,
you?
fine. Go ahead and spoil everything. That's not, no, it's not. You can see it though. You can see God answering Job from the whirlwind comes right out of this, right? It's like, you think you're that important. I mean, one way of reading Job is God answers him. He never answers his objections. He doesn't say, no, your suffering was just. He tells his friends they were wrong. But what Job is about humility. If you read it this way, it's about humility, right? It's about where were you when I created all this, and did you have anything to do with the motion of the stars? I'm sorry, are you the one who makes the sun to rise across the sky? I missed that, right? And so we'll get to that next week. We'll look at the immensity of the universe and then the consequences for human humility that should, not always does, bring. But yeah, that's where Job would fit in, I think. And you can see Job is a later text, and it's building right out of this, actually. But raising the problem, which we'll look at down the line as well, of suffering, right? Especially the suffering of the righteous. And Job is, I mean, no one ever disputes. His friends try to tell him he's really a sinner, but he's not. He's suffering way beyond, and God knows it, right? God knows that Satan, not the devil, the adversary, Satan talks God into afflicting Job to see if he'll still worship God when he's afflicted. Satan's like, of course he'll worship you when everything's going well, but what happens if everything's taken away? Will he still worship you? And God says, let's find out, right? So God knows that Job isn't guilty. That's the whole point. But anyway, so we'll look at that question of the suffering of creatures in light of the Creator, because it's a huge issue, yes?
I'm just wondering how, you don't speak to it now, I'm sure you will in the future. To me, what I hear is the great expansion of God as deliverer.
As deliverer? Yeah.
In a sense, they've experienced God delivering them.
Right.
Today we read about the serpents in the wilderness and everything else. But here you have this immensity, revelation of who God really is. Well, hey, don't worry about being delivered. It doesn't matter where you are, you grasshopper. I can deliver you.
Right.
I guess for me today, I think the challenge is that do we believe that? You
Right.
mentioned that.
Right.
Do we believe in the immensity of God's power in sense of deliverance?
No, it's good. That's a really good question. And do we believe in the immensity of God's work? Most of which, I mean, especially now, I mean, they have a kind of if they're in Babylon, the Babylonians are starting to develop astronomy, and they're developing instruments that can actually look at the heavens that are like a telescope. They're different, but they're like that. They can enhance the vision. So we don't know if this is coming out of Babylonian astronomy or if there's just this incredible use of the imagination by the prophets and by God through the prophets, if you want to read it that way too, which is perfectly fine, that is just completely altering our perspective, right? Which goes to your point. And our perspective is this people, this land, this God, right? Very local. It's a very local perspective, as it should be. That's what grasshoppers do, right? So we're in the meadow, we're trying to figure out what's going on next to us. It's very helpful, actually, to think of yourself as a grasshopper, because our behavior is pretty similar. You know, when we get spooked, we jump. Well, what does a grasshopper do? It jumps, right? We make noise, they make noise, so it's really interesting. They can fly, we can't. But anyway, so our perspective is very local and very proximate, which it should be, and all of a sudden, Isaiah and others are asking us to take a totally different perspective, a cosmic perspective. And then when you're in Babylon, despairing that you can't be delivered because God's in the soil of Israel, well, God is everywhere, and God's numbering the stars. So how hard would it be to get you out of Babylon, right? And also, why is your being in Babylon so enormously important anyway? Because God is everywhere, and God relates to all creation. And you can see, actually, there are a lot of Jews who don't go back to Israel in this period. It's the beginning of what's called the diaspora. And a part of it, I'm convinced, is, well, if God's the creator of heaven and earth, you can worship God anywhere, right? And yes, you should go back to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage feasts, which they do. And Jerusalem is still central to Jewish identity throughout this whole period, well, till today. But it's not central in the way that God's only in Jerusalem. God's only in the land of Israel. And so, going to Gay's point, the despair one would feel being away from the land. And remember, Naaman takes soil from Israel to worship God in Syria. The despair you'd feel if that were true is gone, because God is related to everything, God, the stars. And so it's but as she asked, one of the questions, and this is why it'd be interesting to teach this material, do we even think about this, and do we believe it? And we're in a position now, you want to talk about the immensity of the universe? These people had no clue how immense the universe is, and this is what they're still saying. So it's really interesting. Yeah, Lorraine?
I have a question. Is the Genesis story text, is that after Exodus?
Is that after what?
Was the Genesis story and/or the text after Exodus?
Oh, yeah, you mean in terms of when it was composed?
This idea of God as the creator was later.
Right.
Than, saving of Israel, from Egypt. So is this considered to be written after the Genesis story?
Yes. Well, the Genesis, everything's written around the same time, which is in Babylon.
Yeah.
Right, which is interesting, right? So the Torah that we have, the first 5 books of Moses, as it's called, was pulled together when they were in exile in Babylon. And then Ezra the scribe brings that book, or those scrolls, back to Jerusalem and reads them to the people. And that's the beginning of what we come to know as the Bible, really. And so we don't know, this is highly debated, right? When was each book written? That's what my friend was rightly arguing with me about. And so he thinks that Israel had a creation story long before they were in Babylon. I don't. Right? I think Genesis 1 is very reflective of this, because it starts with this incredible, when you read Genesis 1, human beings, is God ever going to get around to creating human beings? It's really humbling. It's like, and then creatures, and then all these other things, and trees for them to live in and stuff. It's like, hello? Why weren't we the first things created? So you could read it as a crescendo, human beings, and especially since we're in the image of God, that's a crescendo kind of moment. Or you could also read it, and maybe you should read it both ways, as humbling. That God is creating all sorts of stuff that has nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with it. It's not for our advantage. It's not for our enjoyment. It's because God delights in creating it and caring for it. And so that's another way of reading Genesis. But if that's either way, I think that Genesis 1 into 2 comes out of this period. It's part of the same prophetic vision of God. In a way, it doesn't matter. As long as we can see just how, I think it's revolutionary, how revolutionary this view is. It doesn't matter the dating of it. Let's say it's all rising at the same time. I would say Genesis 2, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, that could be earlier than this, because it doesn't have, God doesn't create, notice it's much more local. They're in a garden. which is much more like the land of Israel. And in fact, I think the whole story of Adam and Eve is a parable about Israel's experience, so, and being expelled from the land because of their sin. So there are different ways of reading them, but I can't read Genesis 1 and think of anything other than Isaiah 40, right? There's just nothing else in the story up until then that looks like Genesis 1. And you think if Genesis 1 were first in their narration of the works of God, it would show up everywhere. But it doesn't. It doesn't show up. And the other thing that doesn't show up is there are no other gods but Yahweh. That's a revolutionary thing. And you see this in Jeremiah 10, just to finish, because this is the other side of this. Thus you, Jeremiah, shall say to them, the gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under the heavens. Right? So in other words, the defining notion of the word God is creating the heaven and the earth, which is why the creed begins with it. Right? So God is essentially, from this point on, creator, and then the God of Israel, but not the God of Israel among other gods, right? It is he, Yahweh, who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. So you can see again that cosmic view. It is he, Yahweh, who delivered you from Egypt. When he utters his voice, there is a tumult of waters in the heavens. They think the waters are above the sky. And he makes the mist rise from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain and brings out the wind from his storehouses. Everyone is stupid and without knowledge. Goldsmiths are all put to shame by their idols, for their images are false. Their images are false. There is no breath in them. The portion of Jacob is not like these, for he is the one who formed all this, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Yahweh of hosts is his name. And so you get this dichotomy. The nations create their gods. God created the universe, right? And also, there's a wonderful passage in Isaiah, and I know we're out of time, so thank you for staying, that when you make an idol, you have to carry it around, and they even put nails in the feet of the idol so it doesn't fall over. But God carries you all along, right? So you're carrying your gods around, and God's carrying you. So there are all these reversals that take place in this period as well, that you create the idol, God created the universe, you carry the idol, God carries you, and God carries everything, actually. So it's, once this switch is made, they just run the table on all the different ramifications that it has. But one of the ones we'll start with next time is humility. Like, if this is true, and we believe it is true, we say it every Sunday, then what does that say about us in the universe and God's relationship to the universe? And we now, as I said, have an opportunity really to think that through in terms of everything we're discovering about the immensity and mystery of the universe now. It's interesting. They figure out of the 100% of what could be known about the universe, of course this is human arrogance already to think that, we know about 4%. We know about 4%, and that's under revision right now. You know, because the James Webb Telescope is showing us stuff that's not supposed to be there. So anyway, so we'll talk about that next time. But anyway, I hope this is of interest. Thank you very much.